Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome to the show. So today I have a very special guest with me. His name is Andrew Sherry. So a little bit about Andrew. Andrew is the strategic leader based in Manchester, and we're very good friends. He is also the chief scientist of the National Nuclear Laboratory. Sounds very technical and fancy. Uh, they basically work in all aspects of nuclear technology to benefit society. This includes things like nuclear energy, nuclear space batteries, and they're also now exploring medical isotopes, which influences cancer treatment. I sound clever there, like I know what I'm talking about, but I'm sure we'll dig into that a little bit later. He's also served in various ministry roles within church. In particular, he's served as an elder for Ivy Church, the same church that I go to. He did that for about 15 years. Although I'm an elder myself, unfortunately, we didn't have the chance to work together in that capacity because timelines didn't quite overlap. So this man of faith is highly respected in his field, and in his spare time, he also practices calligraphy, photography, banjography, no such thing as that, playing the banjo, and he plays guitar and he plays piano. He loves the great outdoors as well. Andrew, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Andy. It's good to be here.
So I want to get right into it, if that's okay. This is all about finding out about Andrew the man. And a good starting point that we agreed before the interview was your childhood. There was a time in your childhood that seemed to have been quite pivotal, in particular, a parents' evening. Would you like to tell me what happened and how that's kind of formed the path that you've been walking up to now?
Yes. Well, this is something Mum and Dad told me years later. Just before my O-levels, or GCSEs now, my parents went to the school, and my chemistry teacher at the time didn't think too highly of me, probably because the feeling might have been mutual. And he said to Mum and Dad, don't get your hopes up. He's not going to make it to university. You need to think about his future. They never told me that, but that almost came true. Because at school, I think I enjoyed sport more than working. And I pretty much flunked my A-levels, came out with 2 grade Ds, and I failed chemistry. Fortunately, I scraped into university through clearing to do a subject I'd never heard of before, which was called metallurgy, or material science and engineering as it is now. And that set me on a different course, an exciting path, and something that just grabbed my attention, my passion, my interest, and led me to working ultimately in the nuclear industry in various roles over the years, both in industry, in academia, and now in the National Nuclear Laboratory.
That's great. And so you never really set off to be with a plan to be in this position?
No,
right?
No. It's interesting when you're asked what would you like to be doing in 5 years' time. At that time, I would have had not a clue. And one of the things I tell some of the youngsters I come into touch with through my university role, for example, supervising research, is keep your options as wide as possible for as long as possible.
Yeah. And
stretch yourself. Try different things, because you never really know, what God has put in you, the gifts and the talents and so on. And part of life is exploring all of that and finding out who you are.
Yeah, sure. And how long did that exploratory phase take? Because I assume to be in the position that you're our chief scientist of the National Nuclear Laboratory, that was a role that you would have had to develop into and specialize into. So you'd have been walking down that particular path for a while. But you say that sometimes to find out what you're made to do, you need to explore. So at what stage was that for you, and how did you do that?
Well, that's a really, really good question. So I think the first thing was when opportunities arose, either at work or at church or in personal life, the idea of exploring those things, not shying away. There's a lovely book called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway.
Amazing. I just encourages to say that was my very first personal development book that I read at the age of around 15, 16 that my dad threw at me. And that actually was what launched my whole journey into this world. And that's pivotal. So that's yeah, great book.
Well, and it's something, you know, I reflect on most weeks, because most weeks or months, you know, during my career, there have been those moments where you have to feel the fear, pause, think, you know, who am I? What am I doing here? And step into that opportunity. And you know, you ask about finding out what you're made to do and who you are. Actually, I don't think that ever stops. I think in the first, you know, part of your life, maybe up to, you know, 30 or 40, you're really discovering things. You know, in those young ages, you sort of wish you were like somebody else. You know, I wish I could play the guitar like them. I wish I could speak like them. I wish I was as clever as them, and all of those sorts of things. Then there comes a point where you sort of know who you are, and you know who God has made you and what your gifts are, and you're comfortable in your skin. And it's really encouraging, because once you sort of reach that point, you can really start having a greater impact and be more fruitful in the second half of your life, or, you know, than the first half of your life. But you never stop learning, never stop stretching yourself. You know, I never stop trying to do new things, because it's an exciting journey, and one that you want to have a big impact, you know, in this world.
Yeah. And that's really evident by the conversations that we have, Andrew, and the things I've seen you post on Facebook. There's a new hobby that you are learning every single week. You're like a yes man when it comes to trying new things. And
wouldn't it be terrible to get to the end of your life and discover that you could have been a world-class violin player, but you'd never picked up a violin?
It's true.
So
it's true.
I like to try things, and if you fail, it's fine. You've learned something.
It is. Maybe I should join you at your next calligraphy class.
That's a new one this year.
So you mentioned you never stop learning, never stop stretching. But do you remember the point at where you decided that your current profession is where you wanted to go down and really deep dive into?
Well, yes, I think when I was at university, when I finally got there, I was fortunate enough to be offered to do a PhD, and I'd applied for loads of jobs and just couldn't get an interview, probably because of my A-level results at the time. But I was offered to do a PhD, and finding out and discovering new things has always interested me, and I always like finding out what I didn't know before. And it really fitted me like a glove. So this idea that to work in research, in discovery, in moving boundaries forward of knowledge, understanding, and so on, just lit a fire in me. And that's been a theme throughout my whole career. And then I was fortunate enough to be offered a job at the United Kingdom Atomic Energy Authority. And that was in a department called Engineering Metallurgy, in a field I didn't know anything about at the time, different from my PhD. But just loved discovering it. And it was a fantastic place to be trained and develop in that, you know, the art of research. And I loved doing it. We then went through a process of commercialization. You know, we were a national laboratory, we became a commercial organization. And that really gave me this combination of the importance of research and innovation on the one hand, but then also the importance of doing that in a commercial world focused on real challenges and real problems for industry, and bringing those two things together to create value. And that's really been a feature of my career for the last 35 years.
Wow. So I think for my benefit, and maybe for some others who are listening, it'd be really good to get a little bit more understanding of the role in your profession. Like, what is the impact that you're having directly, indirectly, maybe with the type of teams that you're working with in or over, and also the mission of the National Nuclear Laboratory, which you're a part of at the moment?
Well, the mission of the National Nuclear Laboratory is to really create value through science, technology, and innovation, and that's value to society. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to join the National Lab, which I did just over 4 years ago, because it's not just about the organisation itself, it's about the influence the organisation has in the UK and more widely around the world. So when I first joined, the first thing I did was to think about, what do I see this organisation being in 5 years' time? And I wrote a strategy really to say that we should be world leading and world renowned in a number of areas of science and technology, in nuclear science and technology. And I put some structure down to that strategy and what I'd want to grow and how we would measure it and all of that sort of thing. It was the first science and technology strategy the laboratory had ever had. And we're now 4 years into that. And three things that were really important to me. One was we should improve the quality of what we do. Secondly, we should improve how we collaborate with others. And thirdly, we should improve the impact of what we do through innovation. And I put some measures in. So quality we measured by the number of publications we publish in scientific journals. Collaboration, we measure the leverage, the investment that I put into science and research through collaborations, for example, through the European programs. And impact, we measure by the investment I put in compared with the commercial contracts that we win in related areas. So we measure these things every quarter. And what we find now is the number of publications we publish is 3 or 4 times more than we were doing when I first joined the organization. So this is bedding into the DNA of the organization.
Mm.
Our collaborations multiply my investment by a factor of 10, at least. Some years it's even higher. So the value that we work in collaborative projects are much bigger than we could do ourselves. Mm. And our commercial gearing is about 5 times my investment that I put in. So the sustainability of the organization as a whole is actually dependent on the research we do. Mm. And that's all driving in the right direction. But it's also about the UK. It's also about nuclear technologies benefiting society of the UK. And that's been a growing part of my role in recent years.
Yeah, great. So tell me more about that, Andrew, like that, the benefit to society. How does the work that you're currently doing, or how is it impacting someone like myself, directly, indirectly?
Mm. Well, the most obvious way is when you turn the light on or your computer on, you need electricity. And at the moment in the UK, about 20% of that electricity, so 1 in 5 light bulbs, actually comes from nuclear energy, nuclear power from power stations around the country. And part of our role as an organisation is to ensure those power stations continue to operate safely and securely and provide the electricity that we need. And that's become, in my mind, increasingly important because you'll be well aware, as a world, we face a massive challenge around climate change. And in the UK, the government has recently put into law that we will drive towards being a net zero economy. That's an economy that doesn't effectively generate any carbon dioxide that we don't manage by 2050. And that's a massive challenge. And so a lot of my work at the moment in the UK is thinking through what does that mean, not just for nuclear technologies, but also for other low carbon technologies, renewables, carbon capture and storage, transport, and so on. So one of the things I'm doing at the moment is leading a group which is part of something rather grandly called the Nuclear Innovation Research Advisory Board. And we advise government about nuclear technologies for the future. I'm writing a report at the moment around how does nuclear see itself in that future net zero economy, and how can we get there? And there's some big challenges, particularly around costs, around public engagement, around the whole commercial model for nuclear, because nuclear power stations are very expensive to build, but they last for 60 years. And I'm thinking through what does that look like for the future.
Wow. It's massive, isn't it? It's such a... it's going to have such an influence on the future. And I'm thinking about the next generation here.
Oh,
That's the
yeah,
kind of work that you're doing.
absolutely. And it's important both for the net zero mission that we're all a part of, working out. But it's also important, as you say, for the next generation in terms of the economy, in terms of jobs, in terms of local regions within the country. And it's important for exports around the world. We face this together. And there's a growing movement that I've been involved in and really trying to pioneer, which is that if the nuclear sector is going to play a part in this future, and I believe, we really do need all the technologies to deliver the energy that we need as a country and as a world. If we're going to do that, we need to change. We need to address the cost challenge, and we need to do that through innovation. And that's innovation in technology, but it's also innovation in culture and in leadership, in investment and commercial models, in collaboration, who we partner with to deliver this, and also in safety and regulation. And so I'm working in all of these areas, interestingly, with people from other sectors to learn from how do others do this? How do others create a culture of innovation to drive economic impact and a net zero future? And so a lot of my time is taken up with organising roundtable discussions, writing reports on these sorts of things, and sharing them with the government, with other industries and people around my sector as well, because actually we're all in this together. Influence in a positive way. As you say, we can make a difference, not just for ourselves, but for those generations to come.
Andrew, thank you for that. That's really insightful. I've learned a lot actually in that answer that you gave. Great stuff. I want to switch tack here and move from the professional into back to personal, back to Andrew Sherry the man. What's it been like serving in ministry? That's obviously seems to be a massive part of your life. Serving as an elder, quite a heavy weight of responsibility at times, as well as it being an amazing privilege. What's that been like for you? Tell us a little bit about that journey.
Well, I think what I found is in whatever role you have, for me, it's important just to be me. I, try and be me in whatever context I'm in, whether I'm meeting a senior politician or a scientist or a professor in a university, or somebody who comes along to Ivy Church, in whatever context I am. I just try and be myself. I suppose that's, trying to be comfortable in your own skin, really. So in serving at Ivy as an elder, or in leading worship or preaching, in one sense, strangely it might seem, it's no different from being in a meeting or leading a meeting or giving a talk at a conference, because actually I come to those things from the same place, and that's who God has made me to be. This sense that I can only do what I'm sort of called to do with God's help and support. I'll give you an example. A few weeks ago, I was leading worship at Ivy Academy, where we both go to church. And, what you prepare during the week, and you think and you pray about, the songs to choose and the scriptures to read, and putting it all together, sort of as a partnership, really, with God and with others, and we bounce ideas off each other. Equally, I had to go into a meeting 2 weeks ago with a senior politician to talk about nuclear matters. I prepared in the same way, prayerfully. Before I go in, I just pause, and say, make sure I'm in the right place with God, and that, I'm focused on the right thing. Just as before I lead worship or go into a prayer meeting, I'll pause and think, am I in the right place? Am I going into this with God's help? So through all those things, I just try and be me, but not me on my own. There's a great verse which I keep on my desk here, which is all about, God choosing us, not rejecting us. God telling us He's with us, He'll strengthen us and help us, and he'll uphold us.
Mm.
And that's something which I try and reflect on
Mm.
all moments, whether in church ministry, in work life, or in home life, you know.
Mm. Mm. That's great. You talked about being comfortable in your own skin, and that seems to be almost like a milestone, like can be a eureka moment, because once you get to that point, it's like, I don't know how you would describe it. It's like then you almost have this freedom of expression. A lot of fear goes away that you might have had. Pressures and stresses can also be relieved
Mm.
once you're comfortable in your own skin. How did you do that? What did you do to get there? Or are you still doing it?
Well, I'm still doing it, I would say. You know, 18 months ago, I worked with a personal coach around some of this sort of stuff. 360 reviews of what do people think about me at home and at church and at work, and how do I respond to that? And I don't think I ever stopped learning that, actually. And but it's important also to play to your obvious strengths, and learning your strengths is as much, I think, about listening to what other people say about you
Mm.
than what you say about yourself. I mean, in most jobs, people will do an annual review of how did the year go and what's the next year going to hold. And I've always taken those really seriously, thought about it myself, but importantly worked with the people that I work with to listen to them and their insights. Those are always important, you know, and it's as important to listen to, you know, what your weaknesses are as to what your strengths are as well.
Why is that?
Well, because otherwise you can, I think you can be good at everything, and that's not always the case. I mean, it's one of the toughest questions I got asked in an interview is, what are you not good at? Because we don't like to admit our weaknesses. But when we think about what gives us energy and what drains us in what we do, that's sometimes a better way to think about it. So what drains me is detail. I can do detail if I have to, but I don't enjoy it. And there are other people who can do that a lot better than I can. So it helps me to identify good people to work with, because they sort of plug those weaknesses. And if you get a good partnership like that, whether it's at home, you know, in your family, with your partner, and so on, or whether it's at work in teams or at church in teams, actually we all support each other, and it goes back to that collaboration word.
Mm-hmm.
It's about collaborating.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not all good at everything, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
But if we can find out what our strengths are and our weaknesses, you know,
Mm-hmm.
we actually have a bigger impact where we are.
Mm-hmm. And to take, you know, and to get to that point where you have that awareness about yourself, about your strengths and weaknesses, involves, as you mentioned, a bit of self-reflection, but also taking on board the feedback that you get at reviews and 360 reviews and things like that. I mean, how do you, what's your approach to receiving feedback like that, Andrew? How do you discern what type of feedback to accept or to reject?
Well, I always listen and reflect. I don't rush to a conclusion. I find this in all aspects of my life. I am quite reflective on things, and that helps to distill out the core elements, you know, of learning. I remember somebody giving me some great advice once. It was in reviewing actually a nuclear safety case, and he said to me, "You'll read this the first time, and you'll think to yourself, that seems fine." And then he said, "Go away and don't look at it for a few days. And in a few days, come back and read it again. And you'll read it again, and your mind will have been processing things in the background. And you'll read it and you'll think, oh, that's interesting. I wonder why they did that. Or, you know, what about this? And questions will start to come in. And that sort of reflective style of reading something or listening to feedback, I think is really important to me. So I don't react to start with, but I'll write it down. I'll reflect on it, for a couple of days, not think about it, come back to it and think, what's really important here? And I found that to be very helpful, that sort of approach.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's a really good point. Going back to something more than once, because the first time we're exposed to something, it takes time sometimes for these things to sit in us, and unconsciously, our brain is doing a whole bunch of stuff, processing that information, organizing it, making
Exactly.
sense of it. When we're even not consciously focusing on it, it's doing its thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really good, really good. Anyway, I have a interesting question here for you. Um, what's something that you failed at?
I asked this question to people at work, actually, after you sent me the questions, and one of the guys I work with said, I fail every day.
It's a
And
good
actually,
answer.
when I stopped and thought about it, I failed my A levels. I fail in proposals that I write to do things. I fail in papers that I want to publish that sometimes might get rejected. Failure for me is a sort of part of life, actually. Every failure is a learning experience, and can be turned into a positive. So just because I failed my A levels, that opened up a different opportunity that I might not have thought, well, I certainly wouldn't have thought about. And that opened up an exciting career and future that nobody would have expected, certainly not my chemistry teacher at school.
Mm,
Um, when I've had papers rejected or some reviewers' comments, I've had to think about them, reflect on them, and improve the paper, put it in, much better paper. Proposals too. I've learned probably more from the proposals that have failed than those that have succeeded.
mm.
So that's always been my sort of approach, is to learn what I can from those things, and build that into how I do things in the future.
Mm. That's good. What I've noticed, throughout this interview, and we're talking about things like feedback and being comfortable in your own skin, having that security in yourself, is that it's all tied together. Like that security that you have in yourself affects the way that you receive feedback. It affects the way that you look at failure and respond to failure. It's so key because you mentioned that when you get feedback, you don't react. Um, some people do,
Oh yes, yes.
and you don't, and it's just because of the way that you see it, right? It's not, I'm assuming you don't see it as a slight on you, an attack on you and in your value, but really you separate who you are and your identity from that task or that report or that piece of work
Mm,
that you're working on.
mm, I think that's right, and I think one of the things that I've learned, and is the manner in which the feedback is given. When I
Hmm.
was younger, was very important. These days, it's less of a challenge. So, for example, I worked in academia, the University of Manchester, still supervise research there. But working in the academic world is very different from working in an industry world. And one of the factors of that is academics will tell you exactly what they think in all sorts of emails or personal feedback, which can be quite personal and challenging. Um, but there's always an element of truth in that. And what I've learned to do, I think, is to sort of, I say to people, just rise above it, rise above it. Because sometimes when you're getting feedback that's pretty sharp and difficult to take, you can want to respond, right? It's a bit like writing the email that you don't send.
Mhm.
Academics tend to write the email and press send quickly.
Yeah.
Um, but I guess it is being comfortable in your own skin and not bigging yourself up, not being proud, but just being comfortable, because then you can take that feedback, whether it's cutting or given in love or whatever the context, and just get to the kernel and the heart of the message. And that kernel and heart of the message takes time to get to. It goes back to that being reflective. And also, actually, when giving feedback to others, it's really important to think about how you do it and to boil it down to its absolute essence. So the message can land well and land quickly. Pages and pages and pages of emails, don't really help. But summarizing things in a short, simple phrase, which takes a lot of time to think about, is really important.
Yeah, it's good. It's good, Andrew. So I want to move on to the last question, really, as we're running out of time. How are you intending to increase your impact going forward?
That's a great question. So I would say two things, I think. The first is to focus my time and my energy on those things that I know I'm good at, that give me energy and that excite me. But secondly, importantly, to work with others increasingly, because ultimately you can only have so much impact, in this world on your own. But by working through others and helping others perhaps to catch the vision that you can have far greater impact. So just thinking about that strategy I wrote 4 years ago at the National Nuclear Laboratory, what we're finding now is that the organisation and people in the organisation kind of get it. And what we were dreaming of, what would it be like in 5 years' time? Now we're at 4.5 years' time, is actually happening. And I don't need to push, in certain areas of quality of collaboration and impact, because actually people have got it and they're doing it themselves. And I hope to be able to do more of that. And that's, one of the exciting and rewarding things in a career is when you see something that nobody else does, you write it down and you just put some measures in place to help move in a certain direction. When others get it and see why you've moved the organization in a particular direction, it's hugely rewarding. Actually, it does create, a positive future for that next generation. It does create impact in this country and the world. And, ultimately that's what I think we're here to do, is to have positive impact. So
that's really good. I can imagine how rewarding it can be, seeing something that you had put in motion years ago and it's just come from your mind to then becoming a reality and seeing it instilled and actually practically working itself out around you. That's incredible.
Well, it is. And it's also exciting because you see people develop as well. I supervise research students at university and they're just sort of learning who they are and, what they're there to do and so on. But also to see them develop and go into their careers and develop as people and with families and all the rest of it, again, is hugely rewarding. And I see that within the organisation and, supervising students at a university, you see those people developing around the world as well. So, that's a big reward for me.
Andrew, thank you so much for being open and taking part in this and sharing the insight into your profession, but also in who you are. I really appreciate your time.
That's my pleasure.
God bless. We'll see each other very soon.
We will indeed, Andy. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.